Welcome, everyone, to Going Deeper. My name is Elisa DiLorenzo, and we go deeper because marriage was not meant to be lived at the surface. Now, I'm super excited about today's interview because we're going to be talking about the F word, and it's probably not the F word you've been thinking about. We're talking about finances, and marriage and finances are, if you've been married for longer than a day, you've probably had issues with the finances in your marriage, maybe even during the wedding. Where all of a sudden things start happening. You're like, what are we going to do? Well, I'm super excited for my guest today. Her name is Leslie Abrigo, and she's so talented, guys, that I'm going to read her bio because I think as I start to share it with you, you're going to see why there was no way that I could possibly memorize this. She is the managing partner of Leslie Abrigo APC. Primarily focusing on family law, Leslie is a dedicated professional with over 14 years of legal experience. She is certified by the State Bar of California as a family law specialist, which is a huge part of the reason why she's here today. She is licensed in practicing law in California and further licensed to practice in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, the U.S. District Court of Southern California, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Now, on top of all of that, she graduated from California Western School of Law and has participated in countless family law trials, settlement conferences, and hearings. She's a member of the San Diego Family Law Bar, San Diego County Bar Association, American Immigration Lawyers Association, Pan Asian Lawyers of San Diego, Filipino American Lawyers of San Diego, Native American Lawyers Association of San Diego, National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, the National Native American Bar Association, the Chamber of Commerce for Chula Vista, Hawaii of San Diego, Leeds, and Kale Aloha Hula. She is an aggressive, hardworking, and let me back that up. Leslie is aggressive, hardworking, and creates great rapport with her clients. She is bilingual and works with clients in both English and Spanish. Leslie will definitely take care of your family, and you can learn all about what she does at chula-law.com. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to see you.
Well, it's great to be with you. And folks, as I was reading that bio, I hope you realize that she knows so many people in the legal world, all over. And the part of the reason why that's so valuable to each one of you is because she's a specialist, obviously, in family law. But one of the great things about having an attorney like Leslie join us today is that, she knows what she does well, but she also knows a huge amount of other people and resources. So as you're listening today, if you're thinking, oh, you know what, I want to connect, but I'm not sure that this is something that Leslie does, reach out and connect with her because she probably knows the person that you need to know.
It's true. I try to stay in my lane, but I know where my lane isn't. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And, a lot of you who have been part of the One Extraordinary Marriage family for a long time are probably thinking, you know what? All right, Lisa, you've brought this attorney on. We don't talk about attorneys too much in One Extraordinary Marriage because most of the time we're talking about saving marriages before they ever get to the point where they might need to talk to an attorney. But I think what you're going to learn today, because as Leslie and I were preparing for this interview, just getting some of her insights, she actually has a lot of guidance on how we can avoid seeing attorneys like Leslie. Not so much that she's going to be able to put herself out of business, but the valuable insights that you bring, Leslie, because finances are a sticky situation for a lot of marriages.
It's true.
What do you see in your practice in terms of finances and marriage? Are finances a primary cause? I mean, we read all the statistics and stuff and people are like, finances and communication. Is it really as bad as they say it is?
It really is. I think you and I had discussed that oftentimes outside of my workplace, when I meet a couple, I can tell within, about 5 to 10 minutes of talking to them, whether or not their marriage will last. And yeah, sometimes those things are based on a number of factors. And the primary factor in the viability of a marriage has to do with finances, being open and being able to discuss your finances before you get to the point where you start talking to attorneys.
Wow. So within 5 minutes?
Yes, absolutely.
You're like the magic 8 ball for marriage.
You'll find it true with many of my colleagues that do this. They do, a lot of divorce. They'll be able to tell you the viability of a marriage.
So, what are some of those things that you either hear or see that I guess raise your radar to say, oh, there might be a situation here?
When people are coming to consult with me, so things that I've noticed will be, I didn't know at the time that I married them that this debt had existed. Or I didn't understand the nature of their business when I married them, and now I'm being sued because of this business enterprise that my spouse got involved in. Or I have kids from a previous relationship, or I didn't know that I had a child from a previous relationship, and now I have to pay for my spouse's financial responsibility for that child.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the transparency factor is huge. Let's see here. Hold on a second. Folks, stick with us. I'm not sure what happened here. We may have just lost Leslie here for a second. Let's see what's going on.
I lost you for a second there. I'm sorry, Lisa.
No problem. We're good. I always encourage people. I'm like, we're just going to keep going because folks, technology is technology.
Yes.
So Leslie, you were explaining to us that you can, when you start hearing these statements, that those are all red flags. And so
Absolutely.
Transparency. Now, one of the ones that you mentioned that kind of piqued my curiosity, because Tony and I have had various businesses over the years, is this whole idea of maybe the spouse starting a business, or you get married and your spouse has a business, and there are legal ramifications for a couple.
Absolutely. So a typical type of example that I see would be someone who is like a contractor, or someone who has maybe a restaurant, something where there is a lot of liability involved. Okay. And specifically speaking for the state of California, when you are married to someone, your spouse's creditors can come after you for your spouse's debt.
That sounds sticky.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So what, I mean, and I know we're speaking primarily to California because that's where you practice law. And
right.
I probably need to put some disclaimer to seek out attorney advice, legal advice for whatever state you are married in.
Right. But generally speaking, your creditors, when, for example, like a credit card, a federal law is, you're obligated on whatever debt contracts or creditor obligations you sign with your spouse or any non-spouse even. So if that person defaults on an obligation, then you are a co-debtor and you're responsible for the obligation of the primary debtor.
So in the instance of business, because we're not going to worry about the people that you're like signing loans for, that you aren't. We're only going to, but what can a couple do? Because, throughout marriage, a spouse might start a business, or maybe they came at, you get married and your spouse has a business. Are there safeties so that you're not on the hook for that debt?
Yes, there are. So a way a spouse could protect themselves, and I know people are like, their little cat hairs, on the back of their neck stand up when they hear the prenuptial agreement, or what we call a postnuptial agreement for people that are already married.
Okay.
And those two contracts between, fiancés or spouses help to limit certain liabilities or the things that people are willing to accept on behalf of their partner.
Wow. And I had never actually, until you and I chatted before we set up the interview, I didn't even know about the postnup.
Right. So it's something that many people don't talk about, but I think that it is a definite way to help save relationships. And and how they help save a relationship, in my opinion, is that you get stressed out about something in your relationship. Sure. For example, you don't want to pay for the child support obligation of your spouse, or we're talking about second, third marriages, people who want to protect their children,
sure,
and their assets for their kids. You don't want to subject your things and your property to someone else's liability. So having a discussion with your spouse about your fears and your worries and how you want to protect your family, you can create these agreements, and then you can put in writing what your desires are for in the event that something should happen.
That sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like what we would do in the event of like putting together a trust and a will. Like we're outlining I mean, those are obviously end of life agreements and things like that. But what I'm understanding is that couples can do this in either the prenuptial or the postnuptial, depending on where you are, to have those same protections put in place. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. So people think, oh, I'm doing this agreement, like a postnuptial agreement, contemplating divorce, and that's not necessarily the case. You can do it in contemplation of a rocky marriage, sure. That's an option. But also in my world, I'm thinking that this option helps to get rid of well, what if my spouse does this or this thing happens to my spouse? How do I protect my kids or my family? And so an agreement like this would dovetail into a trust document. So once you have something like this prepared, whatever your wishes are, you can then take it to your trust attorney and have them modify your trust to reflect your desires in your postnuptial agreement.
So this really requires a couple, whether we're talking prenuptial or postnuptial, to bring their financial intimacy to a whole new level.
Absolutely. If you're not talking about your finances before you get married, that is the biggest red flag ever.
Okay, everybody, just take a minute there. Take a minute.
Here's an example why. Let's say a young couple, they both have student loan debt.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's
right?
got it. Mm-hmm.
You need to know how much student loan debt, or you should know how much student loan debt your spouse has, because when you get married, that debt doesn't go away. You can't discharge it in a bankruptcy. You can't, the community in California would be, in the event of a divorce, able to collect from you a reimbursement for the funds that have been paid on a student loan.
Wow.
Yeah. So you want to disclose those things, because some people, I know with younger people now, people who go into the professional categories like doctors and lawyers, they're coming out of school with, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 worth of student loan debt. It's ridiculous.
That's crazy. Crazy. Well, that number is huge, but the idea that you wouldn't be talking about that before you get married.
Absolutely. And so someone who is getting into a relationship and you think, wow, I'm marrying this doctor, you got to look at the numbers, right? You want to talk to them and say, well, you're making all this money, but how much are you exactly paying to student loans?
Okay.
Like that helps you to better together decide how you're going to manage your finances moving forward.
And that's so important, because it's not just the debt that you come into, it's having that financial plan while you're married.
Absolutely.
Right? Because whether it's your first marriage like Tony and I, or we know we have a lot of families in our one family who are on second and third marriages. And, there's all of these different factors.
Yes. I'll share some examples I've had, and it's on the majority side. When a party comes to see me and they have a prenuptial agreement, the agreement, although is casted to protect the spouse with a greater amount to lose in the event of divorce, you would be surprised at that moment how many people had no clue that their fiance had these assets, this debt, or these obligations that they were responsible for. And it's the very first time that people are learning about what's going to be happening in their marriage.
That puts a knot in my stomach. So for, whether it's a young couple or a couple that's been married, I don't know, 15, 20 years, how do they start this conversation? Because for a lot of people, they're like, well, and we haven't had this conversation, so I'm just going to keep pretending that it doesn't exist. But the reality is that money exists.
Well, let me share. So in California, spouses are fiduciaries of the other. It's codified by law that each spouse has a duty of loyalty and care to the other, and you have a duty to disclose to your spouse during marriage.
Duty.
Okay.
Everybody,
Yes,
duty. Did you hear that? It's in the law. It's not just, hey, I love you and I promise to cherish you and honor you forever. You have a duty to disclose.
that's
Open your
right.
mouths.
So the conversation between spouses, I mean, if you're coming into the relationship with children from a prior relationship or assets that you want to protect on behalf of family members, then this kind of stuff shouldn't be a surprise.
Okay.
When you talk about it, however, you want to say, I got married and I have these children that I have, and my goal is to protect them, and this is how I want to do it. If your spouse doesn't get that, then you need to have some further discussions about what their goals are and what they want from the relationship as well, because you don't want the postnup is not to create animosity or confusion in the relationship. It's simply to just explain what your goals and maybe boundaries are in terms of your relationship. And that's, I think, a good relationship.
Well, and that really touches on the fact that when you're talking about finances, you're actually talking about all aspects of the relationship, right? Because there's going to be that emotion, especially if like that first conversation
Absolutely
kind of indicates that maybe there are different goals here and there are different, and so we've got to build that connection as spouses to say, hold on, let's lay this all out on the table. And that's where that idea of being transparent and of saying, what, this is everything. Secrets. I've said it more than once on the show. Your secrets will always get found out.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. Another example.
Love it.
I personally know of a person, and I can't say how I know, that has almost a $2 million child support debt.
Ooh.
Okay. And so when you're getting into a relationship with someone, you want to know whether or not that person has a $2 million child support debt, because that debt will never go away. It will attach to any future property and earnings and accounts that you might own or your spouse may own. Mm-hmm.
Wow. and that's where this idea of transparency, of talking about finances, of equipping yourselves and saying, we need to have a conversation around this. Whether, those of you that are watching, whether you're dating and you're contemplating, what, are we going to take this to the next level? Or maybe you've been married, 5-10 years and somebody started a business, or you haven't had these conversations, and it's time to start saying, what, this is an area, like, we can't have this be the F word that nobody talks about. Right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
It's got to be, we have so much transparency. I was just reading or listening to some of the testimony that's going on right now at the federal level with like Facebook and Google and Twitter. And, we're trying to bring this level of transparency. We think we've got it, but at the most basic level, we've got to bring it into our marriages. Right. And so are there certain questions, Leslie, that a couple that has been married for a while should, to open this door, should be asking one another?
I would definitely start with, if you don't have shared bank accounts, I would start with that. I would say, you make more or less this amount of money. I make more or less this amount of money. Let's figure out what our budget is and where our money's going.
Okay.
That's the best way to start figuring out where people's, for lack of a better word, soft spots are. And then figuring out what your shared goals are and what your shared goals are not.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up, because the whole shared bank accounts thing, I hear that a lot. I hear that with the premarital couples that I work with. I even hear that with couples that have been married years and years, and they're like, we were all individual accounts, and we actually do. I had this, actually, it was some clients that I have back on the East Coast, and they made the decision to go from separate accounts to individual accounts, or separate accounts to joint accounts. And that was a journey.
Yes.
For the very reason. You're like, where are those spots?
Right. And so in my world, when you have joint accounts, you're saying, these are the expenses that I'm agreeing to share with you. Right. And in your separate accounts, you're saying, well, these are the expenses that I've agreed that I'm going to take care of.
Right.
but you have to have the conversation so that your spouse knows what exactly you're paying for, because that's where the trust comes from.
Uh-huh.
And that also is part of your responsibility to disclose these things to your other half.
I love that it's actually in law. I'm just looking to see if there are any comments on the Facebook page. I love that it's actually in law that we have this responsibility.
It's the highest level of duty and care that you owe to your spouse.
I love that, because I've always, like, I tell people, I'm like, we've got to be living marriage without secrets, without, well, they won't know if I spend this money, or they won't know if I do this, or they won't know. And the reality is that if something goes haywire, and I'm not even talking about getting to the point of divorce, but your spouse gets sued, or there's some other liability, you're on the hook.
Absolutely.
You're on. People, listen, please start talking about your finances, right? And for those of you that are concerned, like, this is going to open a can of worms, because I know there are probably a number of people who are going to be watching this, whether live or on the replay, who are like, this absolutely terrifies me. This terrifies me, because we haven't had these conversations. We've been married, 10, 15, maybe 20 years. And I don't know the first thing about my spouse's finances. And so it's why we do shows like this, folks, so that you can say, you know what, I want to get connected with Leslie, because what she's talking about, like, that actually maybe I can have that conversation, right? And we're going to chat a little bit longer, but where can people find you? Like, where can they learn more?
They can go to my website. They can find me on Facebook, Leslie Alabrigo APC. I answer instant messages. They can call my office, 619-422-7722, and my website, chula-law.com. That's how they can find me. And we're pretty reasonable to, get a hold of. And the quickest way to get a hold of me is by Facebook or email, abrigo@chula-law.com.
There you go, guys. I mean, we're not wrapping this up yet, because I got a few more questions. While I have an attorney sitting right here, you better believe we're going to be like asking questions, right? And if any of you have questions, you can also put them up in the chat, and I'll make sure to look at that in the Facebook group or on the Facebook page. But it's one of those things too, because, and I mentioned it earlier, I know that we have a lot of couples in the one family that are on their second and third marriages, or contemplating, I didn't get it right the first time. I don't want to make some of those same mistakes again. How can couples go about protecting themselves as they do marriage again?
Right. So if this is your second marriage, then you went through the painful experience of going through a divorce. So that in and of itself was a lesson to you to be smarter, hopefully, around the second time, right?
Right. That's why we're talking to you.
So many people on their second marriage will get a prenuptial agreement. And if you didn't, you would try to talk to your spouse about maybe the postnuptial agreement. Many people in the first marriage, second marriage, third marriage, realize after they've gotten married, whoa, I didn't sign up for this, right? I didn't know I was signing up for this.
Okay.
So that's when you come and talk to someone about putting together an agreement like a postnuptial agreement. I have a lot of spouses. I want to go back to one of the points that you said about, people who've been married 10, 15 years. They don't know where to start. I have a lot of spouses. You'll have many times one spouse that's in absolute 100% control of the finances. And then you'll have the other spouse that just blindly accepts, whatever is given to them from their spouse. And if that's okay with you and that makes your marriage work, that's fine. If it doesn't work for you, then remember, you have to be able to speak to your spouse about, hey, I kind of want to know what's happening. I want to have access to these accounts, because it's your right to have those things.
Well, and one of the things I know, I used to work in banking years ago, and I'll never forget the time this older woman came in. She was probably in her 70s. Her husband had died. He had handled everything. Like you said, 100% control. She would just get her grocery money and her spending money and whatever. And he died. And she had no clue how much money they had, where the money was, what the past, nothing.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's
unfortunate. Mm-hmm.
it is unfortunate. And, I understand some people are like, throw up their hands and like, you know what, I don't do numbers. I tell those people you should still at least once a month be having a meeting with your spouse. Call it the budget meeting, call it the cash meeting, call it whatever you want to call it that doesn't give you the heebie-jeebies, and sit there and just say, where are we? Right? And what are our goals? And what are we budgeting for this month, right? What are we planning for? Because if you just blindly turn an eye, for most couples at some point in time, it's going to come back. It's going to come back.
It's true.
And it's one of those things too where I actually want to go back to the prenuptial aspect of things. Even though so many of our folks listening are married, I do know that we have a large number that are engaged, dating. And I want to just ask, what does it look like bringing up that conversation? Because I agree, prenup has got this like dirty connotation around it, like, we're saying our marriage is going to end, and why would you ask it? And I've heard of couples where it only gets thrown out like days before the wedding. How does a couple in a healthy way introduce a prenuptial?
Right. Okay. So again, if you're not talking about finances before you're getting married, like way before you're getting married, I think that's a big red flag.
Right.
We get into relationships and we're really like so happy about them. You're in love. You just want to be in that bliss, but people want the wedding and they don't want the marriage.
Ooh. All right. I just want you all to, like, I'm going to repeat that. People want the wedding. They don't want the marriage. Hello. The wedding is one day. The marriage is like 50 years. We have to focus on the 50 years more than we focus on the one day. That was gold. Thank you. Go ahead. That's a big one.
Okay. So when you have to look at marriage like you're going into business with this person, hopefully for the rest of your lives, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to have kids together. You're going to do all these things together. You're going to meet professional goals together. So if you open yourself up to looking at your relationship in this fashion, as opposed to it just blindly like, oh, we're just going to get married and it's going to be so happy. Everyone who has been married or who is married know that it's a very tough thing to do. You'll see the best and worst of people.
Yes, 21 years, yes.
So talking about your financial expectations during marriage is an important conversation that you should have. And so bringing it up, if you're in a space where you know that you're in a healthy relationship, it shouldn't even be an issue for you to just say, I've been thinking about this, about protecting myself in the event that our relationship doesn't work because 50% of marriages end in divorce. I want to do a prenuptial agreement. Let's talk about what would be fair to you and me if this doesn't work out. Because
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No,
I was going to
say you first.
Okay, I was just going to say that the goal of the prenuptial agreement is to promote marriage, if you didn't know that. And it's supposed to prevent you from wanting a divorce. So it has to sting both ways. That's my opinion.
That's good. That's good. And I think, just as we're kind of wrapping up with this, it's so important for all of you to realize that your finances are a vital component of your marriage. Right? It's not something that just gets relegated to paying the bills once a month. It's not something that you only think about when, taxes or you want to buy a house or have kids. And it weaves itself into so many different aspects of your life. I mean, literally, money does make the world go round, right? Like a lot of people want to say love, but if we can't finance all of that in some way, shape, or form, we're not going anywhere. Right. And so having these conversations with the understanding that you're doing this to protect your marriage. Right. I hope that you all gathered that as Leslie was talking today, it wasn't about, well, this is going to protect you when you get divorced. It was actually about building your marriage. It's that F word that we need to bring into play to build our relationships, to say, you know what, whether it's, a postnuptial agreement where you've started that business and you want to protect, right, all of the assets so that if something does happen from a liability standpoint, it doesn't wipe out everything. Or maybe it's your second or third marriage and you know what, you do have kids from previous relationships and you want to make sure that they're provided for in the way that you had intended before you got married, right? I mean, there are all these different things to consider. And folks, if you've ever felt struggle in this area, it might be time to set up a meeting with an attorney like Leslie. If you're here in San Diego, obviously seek her out. I'm just gonna say, go do it, right? It's chula-law.com.
That's right. And I can actually talk to people anywhere in the state of California. So
okay, so Californians, reach out. If somebody's outside the state of California, because the One Extraordinary Marriage show and Going Deeper is heard all around the world, what is the best way for somebody outside of California to start having this conversation or to find an attorney? Who should they be looking for?
So I have clients that don't live in the United States that have contacted me to have me draft prenuptial agreements for them. So I can do that.
Oh.
If you are in a specific state and you want to know what your rights are with regards to divorce in that state, then you want to look for an attorney whose primary practice is family law.
Okay. So family law.
That's right.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Leslie, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for getting us talking about another F word, probably the most important F word in our marriage. And I just want to remind you all, I do Going Deeper because we don't want to be living our marriages at the surface. We want to go deeper. We want to say, you know what, these are things that we need to be talking about. So until next time, go deeper with finances with your spouse. Love you guys.